All right, you're watching Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. Let's get the latest on Gaza and the wider Middle East with Dr. Alon Burstein. It's been about 2 weeks since you and I have done a segment. That might be the longest gap you and I have had since this war has started, Alon. A lot has happened since the last time you and I talked. I believe the last segment we did was about what Hamas has been doing in Gaza since the IDF pulled back. What are the major updates that we've been following with them in recent weeks?
It's good to see you, Austin, as always. And yes, it's been a while. So really what we are seeing happening in the Gaza Strip is, on the one hand, a bit of a stalemate. We had the initial breakthrough of the deal and the return of the live hostages and the release of Palestinian prisoners and the entrance of humanitarian aid. But then we've had the IDF redeployment, the Israeli military redeployment in Gaza. And now there's a power vacuum. We're not seeing progress yet towards phase 2 of the deal. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later as to how phase 2 is supposed to look and what are the steps that are supposed to happen. We're not seeing that yet. We're also seeing a truce that has broken down 3 times already, but still every time comes back. And so meanwhile, what's happening is a stalemate. And during that stalemate, what is happening in the areas that are not controlled by the Israeli military is Hamas. Hamas is working really hard to reestablish its control in the Gaza Strip. And it's doing it really on, I would say, 3 different levels. One is the administrative level. Hamas has appointed governors to govern the different areas in the territory under its control, 5 new governors. So it's reestablishing its civil administration. It's also reestablished its bureaucracy when it comes to actually offering people social services. Gaza has been, I don't need to tell you, we've been talking about this all the time, bombed out of the sky. Most of Gaza is in rubble. Now Palestinians are returning home. They are facing situations where they have nowhere to live. And so you need a functioning government to actually coordinate the humanitarian aid that's coming in and also to reestablish some sort of semblance of life. Hamas is the only one doing that. So it's also doing that on the administrative level on the ground. It's also collecting taxes from the people while it's doing it. And the third level is the military level. Hamas, we talked several weeks ago about its infighting with the different militias in the Gaza Strip and its executions of Palestinians that were suspected collaborators with Israel. But meanwhile, it is also engaged in openly rebuilding its militant strength in the Gaza Strip. That, of course, goes against the terms of the deal that Hamas is supposed to disarm. But what we are seeing, I just want to give a couple of statistics when it comes to what the Israeli military estimates Hamas still has in the Gaza Strip. This is according to a report from October 20th. According to a report from October 20th, after 2 years of fighting, Hamas's militant strength in the Gaza Strip still includes 20,000 fighting operatives. A lot of them, the majority of them even, are new operatives that Hamas has trained and recruited. It includes hundreds of rockets, over 10,000 guns. All of these things Hamas still has in its possession, and what it is doing now in the last month since this truce has been implemented is organizing it. It has the militant strength, but it was in disarray as a result of the war. On the militant side, Hamas is beginning to retrain its operatives, reappoint officers, and reestablishing itself. To what end exactly? Is this leading up to Hamas violating the ceasefire and re-engaging in the war, or are they just preparing for if it breaks down? That obviously we don't know. But those 3 elements, Hamas's civil control, reestablishing a government, and the militant strength is all going on meanwhile while we're in this stalemate.
So we've been looking at a live look at Gaza. The time, Israel Standard Time, just approaching 3 in the morning, I should say. Alon has been live streaming on his YouTube account, by the way. I popped into one of his live streams recently. I asked you this question. I want to ask it on air as well. Gaza is effectively cut off from the outside world. So is there a scenario in which Hamas at some point actually runs out of military resources? Is that something that's feasible?
I'd say that it's very unlikely. Hamas built up its militant strength in the Gaza Strip between 2007 and 2023. During that time, the Gaza Strip was also besieged. It was besieged by Israel, controlling the air and sea crossings and the majority of land crossings, and besieged by Egypt. Theoretically speaking, nothing came into the Gaza Strip without having some sort of authority or control by Israel or by Egypt. And Egypt, just to ensure that all the listeners are also caught up, Egypt for the majority of those years had no interest in Hamas arming itself. Egypt for the majority of those years, with the exception of 2, was actually an enemy of Hamas. So theoretically, Hamas was already cut off while it built up this entire militant strength. It did that through 2 mechanisms. It did that through smuggling, which theoretically could still be happening. There's between 500 to 600 aid trucks coming to the Gaza Strip each day, distributed by the United Nations. Again, they're undergoing inspection by the Israeli military, but they did also before. So some of it has to do with smuggling and tunnels and et cetera. But the majority, the vast majority of weaponry in the Gaza Strip is manufactured in the Gaza Strip. This distinguishes Hamas from Hezbollah, for example, where the vast majority of weaponry is smuggled from Iran. It used to be through Syria, Iraq, et cetera. In Gaza, the vast majority is manufactured within the Gaza Strip. When the Israeli military was bombing out a lot of Hamas infrastructure, very, very commonly what it was saying is it was bombing out weapons manufacturing areas. Underground tunnels, they had areas where they were building rockets. Hamas, there's live footage, they're not concealing this, is rebuilding these factories. It's engaged in reestablishing this apparatus. Again, does that mean that Hamas is preparing for the complete collapse of the ceasefire? Maybe. Are they doing this just because they want to reassert their control until something happens? Maybe. That really depends if you're an optimist or a pessimist. Israel is saying, look, Hamas is rebuilding itself. The Trump administration, ironically, is the one that's saying, yes, but they're still going to abide by the deal and they will disarm. So at this point, Israel and the United States are starting to disagree on how do we understand the situation. Hamas is looking at this while the 2 sides are talking, while other countries are engaged in projecting the future, and it is rebuilding. And it's very unlikely that they would run out if they managed to build during those years such an army that right now they would run out of something.
So Alon, speaking of the United States, the U.S. has established a civil military coordination center in Israel. There's been some questions about how this thing functions, who is in control of its functions. How much clarity do we have on this center?
We do not have a lot of clarity. It is one of the things that each side, Israel, the United States, and I'll say also Hamas, but more broadly, the Middle East actors, are reading and interpreting and explaining very, very differently. What happened is after the first big collapse of the ceasefire around October 17th, 18th, we had a couple of IDF soldiers that were killed as a result of Palestinian operatives that opened fire in Rafah. In turn, the Israeli military launched a bombing campaign in Gaza. The United States very quickly intervened and made everyone stop and said, we are working on a new mechanism to ensure this will not happen again. 2 days later, it is announced the United States is opening the Civil Military Coordination Center, the CMCC, in a southern area in Israel, in Kiryat Gat, and that they are sending U.S. officers and also U.S. civil, I'm not sure exactly how to say it, civilians that work with the military, in order to begin preparing for the establishment and the moving forward of phase 2 of the deal. Now, phase 2 of the deal includes the establishment of the International Stabilization Force, this multinational military force in the Gaza Strip. It's very vague what is supposed to be its authority. Is it going to be working with Israel, or is it theoretically supposed to protect Israel from Hamas, but also protect Palestinians in cases of flare-up from Israel? It's very unclear what exactly it's supposed to do. What is happening, meanwhile, is there are U.S. troops on the ground in Israel. It's led by Lieutenant General Patrick Frank. And we have seen Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, J.D. Vance, and others coming to Israel, going to this center. The center's coordinating with lots of different countries. There were pictures that emerged 3 or 4 days after the center was opened. And you saw there, alongside troops of the United States, soldiers and delegates from, the list is long, I'll name a few countries, from France, United Kingdom, Spain, Australia, Greece, Cyprus, and in addition to that, representatives from Jordan, United Arab Emirates, Germany, Canada, Denmark. All of this, once again, like I'm always saying, note who's not there. Hamas, obviously, or a Palestinian delegate, and Israel. Israel also has sent a delegate to this center, which is located in Israel, but is not actually seemingly being consulted as to how this is going to run. Now, this came under a lot of internal criticism in Israel that everyone was criticizing Prime Minister Netanyahu for saying, so Israel's lost all authority of its own territory and of the Gaza Strip. It's now just a forward command center of the United States. And Netanyahu said, no, everything's happening in coordination with Israel. And he wanted to go down to the center to show that he is still in charge. He was not allowed to. He had to ask permission from the United States to visit this center, this base in Israel, and it was granted. He visited it on Wednesday this past week. But the fact, again, if we look at the circumstance that the Prime Minister of Israel has to ask permission from the United States to visit a military center that's been established in Israel that is working on the future of the Gaza Strip, tells us a lot about, first of all, the fact that the lines of authority are confused. Who is actually in charge and who is going to determine what's going to happen in Gaza in the future? And it also tells us that this, much like the first phase of the deal, this is right now being negotiated between the United States and other regional actors. It's not being negotiated between Israel and Hamas. It's one of the things that I've said several times in different speaking events that I've had, where I've said, one of the interesting and explosive facets of the ceasefire is this ceasefire and the agreement between the sides was not a product of negotiation between the sides, which usually brings people eventually together, compromises in order to sign a deal. This was imposed by the United States and regional Arab actors, the United States opposing it on Israel and regional Arab actors opposing it on Hamas. And every time there's a breakdown of the ceasefire, there's a lot of questions of, are Israel and Hamas even really committed to it? Because at this point, the United States is negotiating with all these other countries about what's going to happen in Gaza. Israel is just following along, it seems.
You know, Gaza, of course, is what you and I talk about all the time. But Hal Kempfer was on with me earlier today talking about Venezuela. He brought up the idea of Hezbollah and some of their relation to operations in Venezuela. It made me wonder, and I wanted to ask you while you were on before we go, what is the latest in northern Israel, southern Lebanon? What do we need to know about the deal between Israel and Hezbollah? We know late last year they signed a ceasefire deal. What's been happening as of late?
So a lot of the optimism that was seen in the region following that agreement between Israel and Lebanon, it was the Lebanese government, it wasn't with Hezbollah. In Israel and Lebanon, there was a lot of optimism that they established a mechanism that was going to work together, and Lebanon obligated itself to disarming Hezbollah. And then over the first 6 months of 2025, the Lebanese government really seemed to take that seriously. They sent the Lebanese military south of the Litani River. They were dismantling the different areas that Hezbollah had set up all kinds of military equipment or had hidden rockets or was setting up its bases in the past. There was coordination between Israel and the Lebanese government. That's not to say that there weren't violations between the sides. The Israeli military very frequently carrying out bombings in Lebanon, and Hezbollah trying to continuously smuggle weapons and bypass the deal and develop new weaponry in Lebanon. But broadly, there seemed to be a commitment of the Lebanese government to saying this is going to be a new reality. And they were very public about it. That's also a big difference. Contrary to the past where they might have tried to do it clandestinely, this time the president, the prime minister were openly announcing there will be only one army in Lebanon. That started to break down. The optimism that the Lebanese government is both committed to this and is going to succeed in it started to break down in the last month when politically the alliances within the Lebanese government that were committed to having this seemingly peaceful transition to phasing Hezbollah out started to break down. And one of the, I'm not gonna say nail in the coffin, but one of the major blows happened earlier this week when the president of Lebanon, Joseph Alon, openly said, disarming Hezbollah militarily, disarming Hezbollah by strength of force is not going to work. That is not something we can do. That's already a different rhetoric. That's a different tone. That means that Hezbollah has to agree to disarm. Otherwise, the Lebanese government is not going to risk civil war. And seemingly it's a game of chicken between Hezbollah saying, are you really going to push us towards civil war? And the Lebanese government saying, are you really going to do civil war, go into civil war rather than disarm? The Lebanese government now is the one blinking when before Hezbollah was the one blinking. And even the United States is starting to talk in a different tone. Like I said, the optimism of the Trump administration that it's going to impose these deals and they're all going to work United States started to say today, the special emissary to the region, the Lebanese government may end up on its own. If they do not live up to the deal, they may end up left to their own devices. And even the United States is not going to try to stop Israel from doing what it feels it needs to do to disarm Hezbollah. It's not done. I'm saying it's not a nail in the coffin. It's not that the deal has collapsed and it's over, but it's I would say the most pessimistic moment in the deal between Israel and Lebanon since a year ago.
The always informative Alon Burstein joining us. Thanks for making time for us on your Halloween night. Good to check in with you. It's been a while again. Alon is the host of the Israel-Palestine Report on YouTube. You can go give him a subscribe, and you can watch one of his... How often are you live streaming, Alon?
I'm trying to do it about once a week, and I'm hoping to do one tomorrow night also on Saturday night.
Awesome. All right. Alon Burstein tonight. We'll see you soon. Thanks. Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good night. Happy Halloween.
Hey, thanks. We continue.